Have you ever been so hungry your tummy feels like a great growling giant? Imagine that feeling, but for days and weeks and even months. That's what life was like in the land of Israel. For 3 long years, the sky was as empty as a dusty jar, with no clouds and no rain to be found. The farms were bare, the rivers were dry, and the people were running out of hope. Every day was a struggle, a weary search for just one more meal. But in the middle of all this hardship was a man who still had hope. His name was Elijah, and he was a special messenger from God. For a long time, God had been taking care of him in the wilderness, having ravens bring him food and water. But now, the stream he was drinking from had run dry, and God had a new plan. "Go to the town of Zarephath," God told him, "and find a woman there. She will take care of you." So, Elijah set out on a long, long journey, his feet kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. After a journey of many days, Elijah finally arrived at the town gates. The heat of the sun beat down on him, and his stomach rumbled with a hunger that had been growing with every passing mile. As he looked around, his eyes fell upon a sight that made his heart sink. A poor widow was gathering a few small sticks. It was clear that she was suffering just as much as everyone else. Could this really be the woman God had promised would feed him? Elijah walked right up to her and asked for the simplest thing. "Please," he said, "get me a little water in a jar so I can have a drink." The woman looked at him, a stranger who seemed just as tired and hungry as she was. Without a word, she began to turn toward her house to get him some water. But before she could leave, Elijah spoke again. "And please," he said, "bring me a little piece of bread in your hand." This was a much harder request. Water was a kindness. A meal was a sacrifice, especially when food was so scarce. The woman stopped. She turned back to Elijah, her face filled with a sorrow so deep it could break your heart. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she said, her voice trembling, "I don't have a single loaf of bread. All I have is a little handful of flour in a jar and a tiny bit of oil in a jug. I'm just gathering these few sticks so I can go and prepare that last little meal for my son and me. We'll eat that, and then we'll die." Her words hung in the air, heavy and sad. It was a cry of pure hopelessness. Elijah looked at her, and his heart was filled with pity. But he also knew what God had promised him. "Don't be afraid," he told her. "Go and do as you have said, but first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have. After that, you can make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." The woman had a choice to make. Should she follow the advice of a stranger and give away the very last of her food? Or could she cling to what little she had, knowing it would only lead to a sad end? She looked at the prophet, and something in her heart, a tiny flicker of hope, told her to trust him. She took a deep breath, and she did exactly as he had asked. The woman went home. With a quiet, steady hand, she reached for the flour jar and the oil jug. She measured out the last bit of flour and poured out the last drops of oil. It was just enough for one small cake. She put it in the oven, and the delicious smell of fresh bread filled her home. When the cake was done, she gave it to Elijah, and he ate it. The next morning, the woman went back to her kitchen. Her heart was in her throat. Would the jar be empty? Would the jug be dry? She reached for the flour jar, and what did she find? It was still full. She looked at the oil jug. It wasn't empty either. It was completely full. She looked at her son, and a huge, joyful smile spread across her face. They weren't going to die. God had kept his promise. And so, every day the woman, her son, and Elijah ate and ate. The jar of flour never ran out, and the jug of oil never went dry. God had kept his promise, and he provided for the widow and her son for the rest of the long, dry years. The widow had given her all, trusting in God's provision, and in return, God provided for the widow and her son for the rest of the long, dry years. The little jar of flour and the small jug of oil remind us that giving to God is never a sacrifice. It's an investment in a love that never runs out.